As you know, parts of the country are still staggering after a swarm of tornadoes tore through the Midwest last week. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, has jumped into action. It has activated field offices in multiple locations looking to get aid to the people affected by this tragedy. That has at least one presidential hopeful upset. Ron Paul says it's not FEMA or the federal government's job to act in these situations. Listen.
People who live in Tornado Alley, just as I live in a Hurricane Alley, they should have insurance for doing this. But to say that any accident that happens in the country, send in FEMA, send in the money, the government has all this money, it's totally out of control and it's not efficient.
Well, some have called Paul's statements insensitive. Others say he's right on the mark. What do you have to say about this?
Terry Wogan, Executive Director of Social Venture Partners. We appreciate you being here. When you first see that, it's a little tough when you see what for the last 3 days what those folks have been going through.
Absolutely, and I do have a lot of empathy for everything that people are going through, and I would hope that if something like that happened to me, that my government would step in and help me if I needed it.
You know, our producer was very clear on this. We did some research, and Ron Paul, to be clear, he's anti-FEMA. He wants to keep the money at the local level. Yeah. He believes that the local, if you will, the state, it's their job, or it should be their job, not the federal government to help out. But as someone like myself, I've covered tornadoes. I've seen tornadoes. I've interviewed families who have lost loved ones in tornadoes. I've seen this devastation, and this is I thought it was pretty tough for him to come out and say that for those people dealing with this right now.
Absolutely, and you look at Katrina years ago and what happened, and that is so massive, and it took so much for a state to do that alone would be very difficult.
And more importantly, and Chris, you and I both have walked through these, tornado ravaged communities. I've lived in Hurricane Alley for years and years. The states are not able. They're also in shelters. They're also just, torn apart. Many of their own family members, in trouble. So the federal government is kind of that cushion that you lean on and that you rely on, and I just think that Ron Paul's statements may be perhaps a little insensitive, so close to what has happened.
Yeah, because what's next? Earthquakes? Earthquake areas in California, or those that are ravaged by floods. Terry, you have some interesting insight in this. I want to get your opinion, because you used to work for former Governor Janet Napolitano.
Yes.
And if we had a situation like that, let's say a devastating tornado, do you believe, at least at the time from what you've been through, that Arizona could handle that?
Well,
alone?
I don't know if they could handle it alone. I know that any time we had fires or anything like that, you also had firefighters that came in from different states. So I think that we've got to kind of work together and help each other. We aren't isolated, and we shouldn't be.
Yeah, and so many of you reacting. Melissa Williams on Facebook writes, instead of the feds taking the money and doing who knows what with it, he is saying it should stay local. The federal government is too far removed to care about the individual.
And Dawn writes in saying he wouldn't feel that way if it were his family. The federal aid for victims of natural disasters is one reason Americans pay taxes.
And Joshua Kaufman says he's already been criticized for saying no federal funds for hurricane destruction. The reason is FEMA usually ill spends the funds. Just look at what happened with Katrina.
Erica Martinez writes in, we should help our people, period. We should help everyone, especially the poor who need it the most.
All righty, we'll keep that dialogue and that debate going.